It appeared to be just another day, as cars crawled through traffic and reporters huddled in small groups waiting for the next big story. But inside the carpeted hallways of Capitol Hill, a single sentence had just been spoken, and it was about to start a political firestorm. Outside the White House in the late afternoon, the golden hues of the setting sun cast long shadows across the south lawn, reflecting off the glass windows of the West Wing. A light breeze rustled the flags lining Pennsylvania Avenue. Elon Musk is an asshole. His remarks during a congressional oversight weren't a joke, an off-the-record comment, or even a thoughtless tweet. The man who said it was a Democratic congressman, and he didn't feel the need to explain. The room went silent for a while, and then a phone buzzed in front of hundreds of reporters under the blinding glare of live television cameras. A political reporter looked at his rapidly moving screen fingers. During an oversight session, a Democratic congressman labeled Elon Musk a dick without providing any background or reasoning. This was the first tweet to go viral. What's taking place was published at 4:42 p.m., 37,000 likes and 12,000 retweets. A few rows down, another reporter hurriedly scribbled out a headline. An oversight hearing devolves into a personal assault against a Democratic legislator attacks. Musk in a 5-minute political Twitter was exploding. A battle line had been drawn, and 15 minutes later Politico and Axios published their first articles. The headlines were brief but attention-grabbing enough for those who had followed Washington politics long enough to understand that this was more than just an insult. Some people laughed, while others were incensed. Congress has criticized Musk for allowing political discourse to turn into personal assaults. A flashing live tag glowed in the corner as the congressman's face filled the screen as CNN broke away from a regular economic report 30 minutes later to air the moment from the hearing. The news ticker rolled beneath the political war of words. Democrats attack Elon Musk on live television in CNN's newsroom. Some people agreed with the congressman, while others shook their heads, but nobody paid any attention at the time because this was not simply a congressional argument. It had turned into a national dialogue. On the screen, the words "breaking news" flashed in vivid red. A Democratic lawmaker recently made a contentious statement during an oversight hearing. Is this a call for violence? CNN had picked up the story, which was unfolding with the accuracy of a predator snagging the scent of blood. The anchor looked solemn, as though what was about to be broadcast could change the trajectory of American politics. The television moved to the footage of senators sitting in rows with their faces carefully neutral, microphones arranged in a brightly lighted hearing chamber on a wooden desk, and then the faint crackling of a microphone followed by a steady, uncompromising voice. The most crucial element, in my opinion, is that we temporarily need to use actual weapons in this conflict because Elon Musk is a jerk. When CNN's live broadcast came to a halt, there was a brief pause for 1.5 seconds, as if the anchor wasn't sure what he had just heard. Almost immediately after, there was a sound of murmuring inside the hearing room, and CNN cut back to the studio. The anchor cleared his throat. So was that a call for aggression? A guest commentator shrugged, eyes scanned the notes in front of him. We must understand the context of that statement. The words were spoken clearly and without ambiguity. There was no, "I was misquoted," or "I meant something else." It had been said publicly in front of millions of people, but CNN avoided criticizing it, seemingly carefully weighing whether it was worth treating as a serious issue. In contrast, when Trump once said, "Make your voices heard and protest peacefully," the entire media apparatus erupted, dominating headlines, talk shows, and editorial columns for weeks. Now, however, a Democratic lawmaker is standing in Congress, talking about real weapons, and no one interrupted or objected. There were no headlines warning about dangerous rhetoric, no immediate panel discussions on accountability. Instant hashtags like CH double standard and rushers were used in response to the statement, not because it was not disturbing, but because it came from the wrong side of the political game on Twitter. Amidst the deluge of responses, a new group emerged who viewed this statement as a rallying cry against Musk as a battle against a force that was reshaping American power structures. Your media bias flooded the platform not only from supporters of Musk, but also from those who merely wanted consistency in media coverage. Musk was not a politician and had neither legislative nor executive authority, But with Doge's most recent actions, he was opposing an untouchable bureaucracy. I think we all understand that this was just strong language. It doesn't mean that anyone actually wants violence. If Trump had said it, it could have been evidence in a congressional hearing, but when it came from someone else at a different moment, it was just strong language. That evening, CNN continued the discussion in their prime-time political panel. Familiar faces appeared on screen, each with their own perspectives, but they all shared a common thread. No one called the statement dangerous, and one guest even smirked when asked about it. The debate was still going on in the CNN broadcast, but one thing was certain. This was becoming more than just an Elon Musk controversy. There was a clear rift in the way the media handled power, and a counteroffensive was already developing somewhere in the shadows of Washington. It wasn't the attack on Musk, it wasn't the general outcry. The most peculiar aspect of all of this was not how a Democratic lawmaker had spoken, but rather how drastically the Democratic Party had changed. Decades ago, the party's most notable leaders stood before Congress and made statements that, if repeated today, would probably result in their own ranks denouncing them. 1997, Bill Clinton stood in front of the nation, his voice calm and unyielding, declaring that the days of big government were past. No one protested or branded Clinton an extremist. Instead, the Democratic Party of the time supported him. Clinton consolidated redundant agencies, slashed 12% of the federal workforce, and guided America from growing debt into one of its rare fiscal surpluses. 14 years later, Barack Obama adopted the same position. We must streamline the government and reduce wasteful spending. He didn't just talk the talk. His Cut the Waste initiative eliminated billions of dollars in unnecessary spending from federal programs that didn't work. It wasn't controversial. It was hailed. But now it's suddenly unacceptable when someone else follows suit. Elon Musk isn't a president, he isn't a legislator, but by blocking wasteful federal contracts, cutting bloated budgets, and dismantling inefficiencies, he is doing exactly what Clinton and Obama once promised. And yet now, that makes him the enemy. Same policies, same principles. But when they no longer serve the right people, they become a threat. Why? Perhaps because a streamlined government no longer benefits those in power. Perhaps because public spending isn't about serving citizens anymore. It's about maintaining control, or maybe American politics has shifted so much that what was once the foundation of a party is now a danger to its survival. Whatever the reason. One thing is clear. This is no longer just about Elon Musk. It has become a battle over power control and who gets to decide America's future. And if those in charge believe they can silence dissent so easily, they've underestimated their opponent. A counterstrike is already in motion. Late afternoon in Washington, the setting sun cast a fiery glow over the city. The warm golden light of the chandeliers flickered on as its orange hues reflected off the White House's tall windows, contrasting the calm beauty of the outside with the storm brewing inside. Reporters rushed toward the briefing room, their footsteps resonating against the pavement, while satellite trucks lined up, their antennas extending toward the sky, sending signals. Every seat in the White House press briefing room was occupied, and there was a sense of tension throughout the country that something significant was about to happen. They weren't here for a new bill, nor was it about national security or foreign policy. New York Times reporters, major outlets like The Washington Post, ABC, NBC, and others had cameras standing ready shoulder to shoulder with mics at ideal angles. While some journalists looked at their phones for last-minute developments, others scanned through their notes. At the front of the room, their expressions were solemn and intent. It wasn't the first time Karoline Leavitt faced a hostile press. She had seen these faces before the suspicious staircase. As she took the stage, her eyes roamed across the gathering, evaluating the room like a soldier analyzing a battlefield. Her words could be twisted by the keen pens. The camera records, every facial expression. Leavitt, who was only 26 years old, was one of the youngest White House press secretaries in history. But she wasn't scared because she understood that her role was to protect the administration from a media machine that was out to destroy it. Today, she knew she was entering a battlefront row. The middle seat, CNN's Jim Acosta. The seasoned reporter was not restless. He didn't check his phone or shuffle his notes, and he sat upright with a pen in hand and a pad full of prepared questions. For years, Jim Acosta had established himself as the White House antagonist, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. He wasn't here to report. Instead, he was here to challenge Corner to turn briefings into verbal sparring matches that were aired live to millions of people. Today, his target wasn't policy, an economic report, or a foreign issue. The balance of power was evident when Karoline Leavitt stood alone at the stage with no allies or safety net in front of her, surrounded by journalists who were in charge of the story. A few seconds before the storm, Acosta slowly raised his microphone and fixed his gaze on her, Madame Press Secretary. He said, "I want to ask about recent remarks made in Congress specifically about Elon Musk." Across the room, pens paused in the middle of a stroke. A few reporters leaned in, but no one was surprised that Acosta was the first to speak. He was always the one to fire the opening shot. Leavitt met his gaze without hesitation. "Go ahead," she said evenly. Costa didn't waste any time. A Democratic lawmaker last week suggested that real weapons should be used in this fight. Does the White House condemn that statement? It's a straightforward but well-crafted question. If Leavitt answered yes, she would be acknowledging that a Democratic official had actually called for violence, something the left-wing media had been careful to avoid addressing. If she answered no, she would have to defend why such rhetoric wasn't dangerous, giving the press fuel to attack her in the crowded room. Someone smirked, indicating that it was a trap, and everyone was waiting to see how she would react. However, Karoline Leavitt wasn't easy to corner. She calmly rested both hands on the podium and spoke in a steady, deliberate voice. She tilted her head slightly and replied, "Jim, I'm so glad you asked that. Allows me to remind you of several things." Acosta's slightly furrowed brow appears to have been forgotten by CNN, as some journalists typed more quickly. Leavitt continued, her tone unwavering, perhaps remember. In 1997, President Bill Clinton stood before Congress and declared, "The era of big government is over," and in 2011, President by Barack Obama himself said, "We have to streamline government. We need to cut wasteful spending." She paused, letting the words settle. "So I have to question for you, Jim." When those words came from a Democratic president, they were called reform, but Elon Musk actually does he's called a threat W. Why's that S? Silence. AEW exchanged glances. Leavitt didn't blink. Because he's not in your party N. None SP spoke. Theological battle had officially begun. Mayoao straightened his grip on his weapon. That familiar sensation surged through him the moment when a debate reached its boiling point. Hen words ceased to be mere sentences and transformed into weapons, striking an opponent or backfiring on their wielder. He straightened his posture, yes, glinting like a seasoned swordsman preparing for a decisive strike. He wouldn't let Leavitt control the narrative. Is this ADA administration really transparent? His voice was sharp and deliberate. Manuleave do doges operating in secrecy. Ness scratched more quickly on notepads as a faint ripple passed through the row room, and a few reporters glanced at one another while nodding slightly. Others worked on laptops, creating the next news story. Concerns about the White House's candor regarding Doge's departure have not deterred it. She picked up a thick binder and methodically turned through its pages, the sound of shuffling paper echoing through, the stillness of the room like the hiss of a blade being unsheathed. There was not a twitch of hesitation or a flicker of uncertainty, but rather a knowing, cold smile that came from someone who had already foreseen the attack long before it was launched. "Jim, you need proof." She spoke with a measured tone. Every syllable is deliberate. It was a scene from an old Western with two gunslingers confronting each other on a dusty frontier street, waiting for the first move. I have it right here. The room plunged into an eerie calm, and even the reporters who typically murmured among themselves had stopped. Leavitt turned another page slowly so that the suspense would build, and every word would come out with a thump when she eventually spoke. A stone striking motionless water, $336,000 for an unclearly purposed DI project, $3.4 billion for the Department of Commerce's Innovation Council, $57,000 for Sri Lankan climate research. She looked up. Her message was clear despite her unreadable countenance. Does this represent transparency, as it is crystal clear? CNN is defending Aosta, who recognized this battle was about more than just numbers and didn't respond right away. The pen in his hand moved slightly, but he didn't write anything down. Journalism has always been about stories, not just hard facts, and today the story no longer belonged to him. These kinds of numbers were unchangeable. They couldn't be sculpted into a different interpretation or spun or altered for better optics. Unrepentant and indisputable. The press room had changed into an arena where the attacker had inadvertently backed himself into a corner beyond the windows. As the sun set behind the Washington ski line, it cast long shadows across the city, and the last of the daylight painted the sky in muted orange and gray hues, much like the remnants of Acosta's argument crumbling under the weight of the numbers that were laid out in front of him. Leavitt remained silent and offered nothing more. Leavitt blinked and hesitated for a moment before speaking, but his confidence had waned. Are these numbers verified? No one spoke as a slight giggle echoed around the room. Conflicts with the Trump administration had become a part of Jim Acosta's legacy, and today was no exception. He wasn't going to allow Karoline Leavitt to leave this press conference with an unchallenged victory. He was unable to let the White House dictate the story. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone, and fired his final shot. Not a claim that might sway the argument in his favor, last-ditch effort to regain ground. But the Democratic Party still holds the majority, he said in a firm voice as though expressing an unquestionable fact. The claim that the majority wasn't on your side carried more weight than the assertion that Elon Musk doesn't have the support of the public. A few reporters exchanged glances, and some nodded slightly. This was a well-known tactic that challenged political legitimacy. If Aosta could even raise a small amount of doubt or even cause Leavitt to hesitate for a single second, the battle wasn't over. Leavitt didn't hesitate for a second, didn't argue, didn't scoff, and didn't say a word. Instead, she lifted another piece of paper, and the fluorescent lights reflected off the clean white sheet. Bright, bold, black letters. It only took a few seconds for everyone in the room to recognize the Newsweek logo at the top, and more crucially, the numbers printed underneath it. Everyone was silently focused on it. Trump 54% consent, Doge 49% of people approve. Vitt placed the paper on the platform, her moves unhurried and methodical, a direct blow to all that Aosta had just stated, a takedown without a single insult. She said, "It seems like the American people don't agree with you," in a tone that was softer than an attack but heavier than an argument, and she looked directly into her eyes, as if she were a surgeon setting the last scalpel on the table after a flawless incision. Jim, the room's vibe changed. Penn paused in the middle of his statement. Some reporters gave each other sidelong glances, while others automatically looked at their phones, possibly to double-check the statistics. They may have been trying to tell themselves that this wasn't the case, but they and Aosta both knew. The numbers weren't lying. The moment lasted longer than a single breath, yet held the weight of an entire election cycle. The tide had changed, and Leavitt had nothing else to prove she had done. He glanced at the paper in front of him, but he didn't respond. Not because he didn't want to, but because he had nothing else to say. What she ended up doing. The streetlights along Pennsylvania Avenue flickered to life, illuminating the city's nightscape as she collected her papers, while a few reporters frantically typed on their laptops. This was no longer a press briefing. Rather, it was a direct political showdown, and everyone in the room could see who was losing. However, beneath the bright lights of the White House press room, a different kind of illumination had occurred. No one declared the conclusion of the briefings, but everyone knew the battle was done. Thus, Aosta had nothing else to say. The reporters stayed seated, their pens hovering over their notepads, their fingers hesitating over their keyboards, while Karoline walked away from the podium, her feet measured, her posture unwavering as if she had never once doubted the outcome of this confrontation. Some were still coming to terms with what had just happened. Others were already figuring out ways to save the moment, but it couldn't be saved. Jim Acosta of CNN had entered that area with the intention of dominating the X exchanges, certain that his statements, supported by years of media sway, would, after all, the narrative has always been the way things have been for decades, with the press dictating reality and influencing public opinion. They framed the questions, created the headlines, and decided who was dangerous and who wasn't, by not reporting the truth, but by selecting which truths were worth reporting. However, today, Ayosta encountered something for which he wasn't ready, someone who wasn't afraid of the game and played it better than him. This was a devastating moment for CNN because, in addition to outmaneuvering Ayosta, Leavitt humiliated him, and worse, she did it without ever raising her voice, yelling, or grandstanding, just delivering the facts with surgical precision. This wasn't just a victory for Leavitt, it was a symbol of something much larger for years for the media establishment. CNN. They were political operatives posing as journalists who used their platforms to push their preferred narratives and label their enemies as fringe or dangerous in order to dictate what was and wasn't acceptable political discourse. For years, the Washington Post and the New York Times operated under the assumption that they were the arbiters of truth, that their position as gatekeepers of information made them untouchable. However, Trump came along and wasn't just a political force. He was a wrecking ball aimed at the media's monopoly over reality. He refused to play by their rules and called them out directly, reveals them as the activists they were, and more significantly, he allowed his fans to disregard them. Now that Trump is no longer in power, Karoline Leavitt is not just defending the administration. She is carrying on Trump's fight against the dishonest media establishment. Jim Asta served as the media's spokesperson for the AA's old order. Outside the White House, the Washington sky had turned a deep shade of midnight blue, and golden light spilled from the towering windows, casting long reflections onto the damp grass below where beads of dew were starting to form, and the trees stood still, motionless. Elites spoke, and politicians shook when narratives, not facts, determined elections, but today, Ayosta was just another remnant of a dying empire because facts still matter, the American people still matter, and no amount of media manipulation or scripted outrage could erase the truth that Leavitt had just exposed. And the most powerful citizens of America were in their quiet embrace, yet the air was changed. Before disappearing into the deserted streets, a gentle breeze murmured along the marble steps that curved around the stately white columns. The White House stood firm as always, but the people who walked its halls, the voices that echoed within its walls, any battles fought in its press room are shaping a new chapter in America's story today. Carol Leavitt had stepped onto the stage and left her mark a young warrior armed with nothing but facts, who faced off against one of the most powerful media institutions in the country and silenced it. But the story doesn't end here. Beyond it carried the crisp chill of a shifting season, the lingering tension of a day now etched into history, and the undeniable sense that a political era was shifting whether some liked it or not. The figures, the polls and headlines will continue to be discussed, analyzed, and twisted in many directions. CNN will not give up. Jim Ayosta will continue in his position. As the streetlights along Pennsylvania Avenue glow, and newsroom keyboards clatter with the next cycle of spin as debates over Trump and Elon Musk continue. The left-wing media machine will continue to fight and claw for control like a wounded animal sensing its own decline. The question now is how the American people will react to this change. Will they realize that those who once controlled the narrative are now frantically trying to hold on to it? Or will they continue to let the media define the truth for them? This struggle is far from done, but one thing is certain. Truth always finds its way back, much like the White House's lights never go out or the Washington wind never stops. The question now is, which side are you on?